All right, we're going to work in on greatest common factor. Make sure your pencils are sharpened and ready to go because a pencil without lead is pretty pointless. Thought that was a good one. Alrighty.
That was the dumbest thing I've ever.
So we are going to be doing greatest common factor. Okay, and greatest common factor, I want you to think of this as the distributive property but backwards. Okay, in the distributive property, we would always distribute a number in. And in greatest common factor, we're trying to pull a number out. So here's an example. We have 3x squared plus 3. And we're trying to pull out the greatest common factor that we can. And I noticed that the first number and the second both have a 3 in them. So I pulled out a 3 from each term. Okay? And now to check my work, I simply go back and type this back in. I go 3 times x squared is 3x squared. And I go 3 times 1 should be 3. And so I checked it and it's correct. Anthony, quiet please. Okay, so if we move on to these sections, in order to check our work, we started with this problem and I pulled out an x. And I wanted to see if I did it right. So I just simply typed this back in. X times x squared is x cubed because there are 3 total x's here. And x times x to the first is going to be x. And since that is not what I started with, whoops, this is not correct. Okay? And so then here's another one that I answered. I tried to pull out, a 3x squared from each term. I pulled out multiple x's, and so I'm going to type it back in to see if I'm right. And I end up getting 3x cubed plus 9x cubed plus 0. And that's way wrong. Okay? So the idea here is when you're done with a problem, you want to just check to see if you're correct. That's the easiest way, and you just do it by doing the distributive property again. Okay? 1 sec. All right, so I'm back. Now, here's where we start looking at some examples. So the idea is there are 2 parts to a problem. Guys, be quiet, please. Okay, you're looking at the number, the 4, and the 2, and you're thinking to yourself, what's the greatest factor of 4 and 2? And the answer is 2. Okay, well then you look at the y and the y here. So this is y cubed, this is y to the first. And you think, how many y's can I pull out? Well, there's 1 here and there's 3 here. So the greatest that I can pull out is 1 from each term. Okay, so then I look at what's left over. If I pulled out a 2 from here, that means I'm left with 2. And if I pulled out 1 of the y's, that means I'm left with 2. And then here, if I pulled out a 2 and I pulled out a y, that means the only thing that's left over is 1. Okay, not 0, but 1. And so if I multiplied out to see if I'm right, I would get 4y cubed plus 2y. And so I know I'm right there. Down here on the bottom, I look at the greatest factor of 9 and 14, which is nothing, or just 1. And then I look at the z's, and I think, how many z's can I pull out of each term? I can get 4, because this will be 9z to the 5th, and this will be minus 14. Okay, so now I distribute back in, and I end up getting 9z to the 9th minus 14z to the 4th, which is what I started with, so I'm good. Both those checked out. Okay, now these get longer, okay, but you're still doing the same process. I'm looking at all these numbers here, and I'm thinking, what is the greatest factor that I can pull out? And I think the greatest one is 2. And I look at all the x's, and since there's no x here, I can't pull out any from every term. So I just factor out a 2. So I'm left with 4x to the 4th. Here I'm left with 2x cubed. Here I'm left with just x to the first, and here I'm left with just 4, and it still equals 0. And now here on the bottom, I look at all these numbers. Anthony, seriously. Okay, well, I can't actually pull out anything from these terms. And I look here, I get a y squared, a y squared, a y squared. I can't do anything. So I have to start thinking about if there's a way I can trick this problem. And I see I have y squared here and here, so I can combine these together. So this one was a pretty tricky problem. And these don't happen often, but sometimes they do. Now, I can pull out a 2 from every term, not a 4, because I can't pull out a 4 there. And so I get 20y squared plus 2y plus 5 equals 0. We're going to skip this portion and here. So I want you to try to factor these and see how it goes. All right, we're back. So for this one, I look at the 4 and the 2, and the greatest one I can factor out is a 2. And now I look at x cubed and x squared, and I can pull out 2 x's. Whoops, I gotta erase this. I can pull out 2 x's there, so I get 2x squared. So I'm left with 2x here, and here I pulled out 2x squared, so the only thing that's left is a 1. Now, once again, you have to do the distributive property check. So I get 4x cubed minus 2x squared, which is what I started with. So we're good. Now on the bottom, I look at 6 and 24. Greatest factor here is going to be 6. I look at y to the 4th, and I look at y squared. The greatest factor there is y squared. So then, here I'm left with 1 y squared, or just y squared. And here I'm left with 4 with no y squareds. And I go back in to check my work. 6y to the 4th minus 24y squared equals 0. That's what I started with. So we're good. All right, your assignment is going to be on a website. We're going to do this in class tomorrow. Okay, everyone have a great night.